Hi there. Welcome to this week's Lenten Bible study. We're continuing our journey through the Sunday morning lectionary readings for the season of Lent that lead us to Easter Sunday, to the work that Jesus does on the cross, and the new life that we find in Jesus when we accept that what he has done on the cross has been done for me and for you, for each one of us. This week we're going to be looking at the passage from Exodus 20. The reading where God gives the people of Israel the 10 Commandments. What we're going to do on Sunday morning is we're going to think about how these set of rules that seem to tell us a lot about the things that we're not allowed to do actually are more about liberty than about restrictions. If you want to hear more about that, you can join us on Facebook Live, on YouTube, or in the Cookstown Methodist Church car park on Sunday morning at 11 o'clock. So let's jump straight into the passage for today and give it a read through. As we read through it, think about the things that jump out at you. Look for things that surprise you, maybe raise an eyebrow, and write them down. Ask yourself, why are they jumping out at you? And maybe, what is it that God is trying to say to you through them? The danger of familiarity when reading our Bibles, particularly a passage like this that might be very familiar to many of us, is we are so used to reading them, or we think that we know what they're saying, that we can miss out what God is saying to us in a new way, because his word is a living word. Let's read through it. And God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Familiar words indeed. I wonder if anything did jump out at you. I wonder if anything was interesting for you to see that maybe you didn't notice before. If you're going to be part of the Zoom conversation later this evening, then write down those things. It's always lovely to hear what you hear God saying to you, or what jumps out at you, and it often leads us to very interesting conversations. When I think of the 10 Commandments, it always takes me back to my days, my childhood time, when I was in the Salvation Army. And as we were learning and training to become junior soldiers in the Salvation Army, one of the things that we had to learn by heart was a rhyming version of the 10 Commandments. And it went like this. Thou shalt have no gods but me. Before no idol bow thy knee. Take not the name of God in vain, nor dare the Sabbath day profane. Give both thy parents honour due. Take heed that thou no murder do. Abstain from words and deeds unclean, nor steal though thou art poor and lean. And do not lie, but always say what is true, and covet not the things that don't belong to you. Thanks to Google search, I was able to be reminded of all these words. I don't remember them by heart from all those years ago. What I also discovered through Google was that these were written by the very well-known hymn writer Isaac Watts. In Matthew's Gospel, in Matthew 22, Jesus is asked by an expert of the law, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment of all?" And Jesus replies, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments." I spoke about this on Sunday, about how our purpose is to love God, to love others as we love ourselves, and to do this in a way that bears fruit. When we look at the 10 Commandments, what we see is that the first 4 commandments are all about the ways that we love God. And the remaining 6 are all about ways that we love one another. What I'm not going to do today is to look at each of the commandments individually. To do that would take far longer than the time that we have set aside. And if I was to try and fit it into the space that we have, I wouldn't do it justice. It really does need a separate Bible study, and maybe that is something that we will look at in the future. But what I am going to do today is just look at the first verse. And God spoke all these words. When I think of God giving the people of Israel the 10 Commandments, the image that I have in my head is of Moses coming down the mountain, carrying these 2 giant stone tablets with the 10 Commandments engraved on them. And then he sees the golden calf and he smashes the tablets on the ground, and then he has to go back upstairs again to the top of the mountain to ask God for a replacement set of commandments. But those only happen later. It's 12 to 14 chapters later that the golden calf and the smashed tablets all appear on the scene. This all happens before then. What's happening here is that God is speaking audibly to the people of Israel. And God spoke all these words. God speaks to the people of Israel, and they hear him, and they hear what he has to say. There is authority in these words. Now, what isn't in this passage that we looked at, but what happens in the verses immediately afterwards, is having heard the voice of God, the people of Israel are terrified. And so what they do is they ask Moses to represent them in the future. To rather he himself go up the mountain to talk to God and to hear from God, and then come back and bring the message back to them. They're afraid of hearing God speak directly to them. But what's happening here now is that God is speaking and they hear his voice. So there are 6 things that I want to highlight in tonight's Bible study about the importance of those 6 words. And God spoke all these words. Firstly, the first time that the people of Israel hear these commandments were directly from God. The authority behind these words didn't come from a leader or from a king. They didn't come from Moses as he came down from a cloudy mountain, but they came from God himself. So there is authority in these words. As they develop their relationship with God, as they come to know God more through the way that he interacts with them in their lives, they know that these commandments have come from God. Secondly, they come from God, but more than that, they come from the eternal God. The God who was there in the beginning before there was anything else. They weren't invented on Mount Sinai. God didn't just suddenly decide, wow, I better come up with some rules for these guys. And so he comes up with the 10 Commandments then and there. But rather, they're a verbal expression of God's law that has been written in our hearts from the very moment that God breathed life into humanity. It is wrong to steal and covet and murder, not because these things are forbidden by the 10 Commandments, but because they're forbidden by conscience. We know that it's wrong to do that. And they are forbidden by conscience because they are forbidden by the natural design of human relationships. And that natural design of human relationships comes from God, who created us in his image. The God of relationship and the God of community. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. A God of relationship and a God of community. And so we learn and we know how to function in community and in relationship with others because we are created in the image of God. So these commandments, these rules have been there before God gave them verbally to the people of Israel. Thirdly, because this set of moral codes are spoken by God, it sets God apart from those other pagan gods that were commonly worshipped in that region at that time. God is a moral God, and the morality of these commandments establishes God as a moral God. While some other belief systems might have encouraged human sacrifice, they might have encouraged using force to wield power over others, they might have encouraged sexual immorality as an expression of worship, as an expression of control. The God of Israel is a God who respects and encourages human life. He respects and he encourages the respect of other people's possessions, of other people's bodies, of family relationships, and many other things. So these commandments set God aside because God speaks them. They are his commandments, and they show the morality of the God in heaven. And fourthly, because God spoke these words, it means that those who choose to obey these commandments as their moral code belong to God. Although we sometimes refer to the law that we find in the Old Testament as the law of Moses, simply because Moses was the one who communicated them to the people, that doesn't place Moses above the law. The laws don't belong to Moses. He is simply the one who delivered them. They are God's laws. He speaks them. And so there is no person that is above these laws. Around the same time as these commandments were being brought to the people of Israel, there was another set of laws, another set of moral code that was around at that time. It was known as the Code of Hammurabi. And they were very similar to the Ten Commandments, but the differences are more profound. Although they mention some of the Babylonian gods, they do talk a lot about Hammurabi, about how wonderful he was, what a wonderful king and writer of the law he was, how much he had accomplished. These laws that Hammurabi brought to his people are more about him. He becomes the embodiment of these laws because he wrote them, and that places him above the law. But here, these 10 commandments, God speaks these words. And so there is no man or woman, no person who has lived on this earth except for Jesus himself that is above the law. In fact, Jesus says that he is the fulfillment of the law. But there is no person, not Moses, not any of the leaders of Israel, the kings that came after him, that is above the law. These are God's laws. And fifthly, because God spoke these laws, or these words, it shows us that we need to have a God who can point us to the correct moral behavior. These commandments aren't the only things that influence our behavior in the world then and in the world today. They are not the only things that can be used for our moral compass. There are loads of voices out there telling us what is right and what is wrong, what is acceptable and what is unacceptable. And some of them sound logical, some of them make sense, but that doesn't necessarily make them moral. We're definitely living in an idea or in a time when the idea of a God-based moral code is unpopular. We're told that our morality should come from our own inner sense of what is right and what is wrong. That phrase, own your truth, is one we hear a lot. But you see, that's not always easy, because something that was considered wrong 10 years ago is now considered right. And the things that are considered wrong today will probably be considered okay in 5, 10 years from now, maybe even 2 years from now. In an ever-changing world, how can we know what our inner sense is all about? What is right and what is wrong? What is our inner sense and what is an outside influence? But God spoke these words, and so we can trust them. And finally, because God spoke these words, we know that they are good and just and holy, because God is a God who is good and just and holy. We don't need to doubt them. James 1 verse 17 says, "Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows." And so if these words are spoken by God, then we know that they are good for us to hear and obey. And because God doesn't change like shifting shadows, like the morality of the world that we live in, then we don't need to wonder if they are still relevant or good or true. That's where we're going to end things for today. God spoke these words. They are good. We can trust them. They stress to us the importance of having a God who is trustworthy, who is true, who is holy. God spoke these words. I'm going to leave you with some questions to think about. And when we meet up later on Zoom, we'll certainly use them as a guide for our conversation. So God bless, take care, and goodbye. Did anything jump out at you, surprise you, or even make you raise an eyebrow? Why are rules not only necessary, but helpful? Where today do you see shifting rules and moral codes, things that were considered wrong in the past, but have now become more acceptable? And then finally, these instructions for life enabled the people of Israel to live in such a way that marks them as God's special people. Instead of constraining them, how are these instructions freeing?